Just to inform you, we're live now at the moment. Today's meeting is being held for live and subsequent broadcast by the way of the Council's internet site. The images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes with the Council. As you will see from the agenda, papers generally the public seating area are not filmed. However, by entering the meeting room and using the public seating area, you are consenting to being filmed and to be possible to use the images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Proposed public speakers have been made aware of the broadcasting arrangement prior to the meeting. Would members please use their microphones to contribute to the meeting, and please remember to switch off the microphones when you are finished. Members dialing in remotely, please turn on your cameras for the duration of the committee as requested by the Planning Department. Also, could you ensure that you could refrain from using any mobile devices? Apologies. S. Cox, Anne Linton, J. Reynolds and Councillor Jordan. Any declarations of interest? Minutes of the previous meeting. Have everyone read the minutes? Could I have somebody to propose? A seconder? Excuse me. First on the agenda is application number 25-0124. Ringland View, Bishton Road, Bishton, Newport. Proposed construction of annex and link walkway with storage and work from home space. Presented by Grant Hawkins.
Thank you. Okay. This application seeks planning permission for the construction of an annex and linked walkway with storage and work from home space at Ridings View in the Langstone and Bishton ward. The application is being reported to Planning Committee at the request of Councillor Mogford in order for the committee to consider the visual impact of the proposed development. A pre-application inquiry was submitted prior to the submission of this application, and the Council raised issues with the location, scale and design of the proposal. The scheme being presented today has not overcome those concerns raised and the recommendations for the refusal of planning permission. The application site is a converted barn known as Ridings View, which forms part of a barn conversion complex of 4 units located east of Bishton Road. At the time of conversion, the barns were located outside of the settlement boundary and within the countryside, as per the Newport Unitary Development Plan. Under the current Newport Local Development Plan, the site was included within the village boundary of Bishton, as shown on the right-hand side of the slide, and is now located within the settlement boundary on the rural urban fringe. So the red arrow there just pointing out where the site is against the village boundary of Bishton. So it's just on the eastern periphery. The site is accessed via a shared private driveway serving the barn complex and is the most eastern unit. It is a garden boundary enclosed with low post and rail fence along the open countryside, and directly northeast of the site are 2 public rights of way. The closest runs west to east across the field directly neighbouring the site at a distance of approximately 45 metres. Further north is the second right of way, which runs north-west to south-east at a distance of approximately 145 metres from the site. The eastern side elevation and garden of the property are visible from the 2 rights of way, with unobstructed views across the fields available. The group of buildings are typical of barn conversions and have a very traditional appearance and a distinct layout. The materials comprise of stone walls with timber cladding, and the roof is covered in natural slate tiles. Under the previous conversion, the simple character and linear form of the barns has been maintained, and none of these barns have undergone significant extension. The group of barns have retained their high-quality character and appearance and offer a positive contribution to the visual amenity of the local area. So on the left-hand side, you can see the linear form of barn conversions, with the application site just outlined in dashed blue. On the right-hand side, that is the eastern side elevation of the application site, Rydens View, that we were considering today. So 4 photographs taken from site visit. Top left, views across the existing garden towards the south direction. Bottom left, views east across the garden to the open countryside. Top right, views northwest and neighbouring barn within the complex. And bottom right, western elevation of the application barn. This photograph shows the views available from the furthest public right-of-way at a distance of approximately 145 metres. At the time of undertaking the site visit, it was not possible to access the much closer right-of-way from Bishton Road as it was blocked. This has been reported to the Council's countryside wardens who are investigating. As you can see, there are clear and unobstructed public views across the field available to the application site and to the neighbouring barns. The proposal will be visible across this vantage point and along the rights-of-ways. The proposed annex is located to the east of the existing barn and is linked by a flat roof extension. The proposed building would measure approximately 5.4 metres wide by 13.2 metres long and would have a height of 2.5 metres to the eaves and 4.75 metres to the ridge. The link extension would measure approximately 2.2 metres wide by 5.2 metres long to a height of 2.4 metres to the flat roof. External walls will be stone and roof tiles slate to match the main building. Fenestration comprises of single pane windows and doors across elevations and bifold doors in the north end elevation. The overall extension, including the link, is approximately 70 square metres, which would result in a 43% increase of the footprint of the existing converted dwelling. The internal layout at the bottom of the screen there comprises of an open plan living room and kitchenette, a hallway that leads to the bathroom and bedroom, and the southern end is accessed separately to provide an office and storeroom. The application advises that it would be the applicant's elderly mother who would occupy the annex and that it has been designed around their wheelchair requirements. The storage would be used for their personal possessions and the office would be used as a work-from-home space for the family of the main dwelling. Policy H7 sets out four criteria for annexes to residential dwellings to be assessed against, as set out in section 7.2 of the officer's report. The annex is entirely capable of operating independently of the main dwelling house, with all of the facilities required for day-to-day living being provided. Supporting text of Policy H7 does explain that even a self-contained annex must support the house in some way, not function independently of one, and the degree of dependency must also be demonstrated on the plan and in supporting information. In this case, we have been told that the proposal will function as an annex, and this will be taken on face value. The proposal will be located within the planning unit and share the existing garden, access and parking requirements, and therefore, on balance, it is considered that the proposal would comply with Policy H7. Policy GP6, Quality of Design, advises that good quality design will be sought in all forms of development. The policy sets out several fundamental design principles that should be addressed. Of keynotes are the following extracts. All development should be sensitive to the unique qualities of the site and responds positively to the character of the area. Where possible, development should reflect the character of the locality. A new development should appropriately reflect the scale of the adjacent townscape. Care should be taken to avoid overscale development. The House Extensions and Domestic Outbuildings SPG also states that a house extension or a domestic outbuilding should relate sympathetically to the existing building and the surrounding area. Although the site now falls within the defined urban boundary, its context remains influenced by the rural origins of the existing buildings. The site lies on the urban edge and is retained and has retained an open rural character. When viewed from the adjacent public right-of-ways, the eastern elevation of the barn presents a simple and understated form, contributing positively to its architectural quality. The proposed extension would compromise the simple form of the barn, projecting beyond the established built envelope and encroaching into the open rear garden. The garden directly adjoins the open countryside, reinforcing the site's sensitive setting and positively contributes to this semi-rural feel. The proposed building, including the link extension, by virtue of its scale and location, would erode the simple linear form of the existing barn. The extension's windows and doors appear overtly contemporary, comprising single-pane window openings and bifold doors, for example, and add to the appearance of the building as an incongruous addition to the property, and clearly visible from public vantage points and within a rural context. The proposal would introduce a visually intrusive element that extends the built form of the boundary with the open countryside. This would not only undermine the character and appearance of the host barn conversion, but would also appear at odds with the context of the wider complex, which is defined by a simple and linear formation. In short, the proposal is considered to be inappropriate scale and design, which is contrary to the aims of policy GP2 and GP6. In terms of the impact on other aspects, such as parking and neighbouring amenity, the proposal is deemed acceptable. At least 3 parking spaces are available in line with the parking standards, and the extension itself does not contribute to any adverse impact on neighbouring properties, such as a loss of light or overbearing impact. Chapter 6 of Planning Policy Wales, Edition 12, states that planning authorities must seek to maintain and enhance biodiversity in the exercise of their functions. PPW 12 requires a proportionate green infrastructure statement to be submitted with planning applications in order to describe how green infrastructure has been incorporated into the development. A GIS has been submitted, and this follows the stepwise approach. Whilst an area of lawn would be lost to the proposed development, the scheme includes planting a hawthorn hedge to the eastern boundary of the site, as well as 3 additional planting areas, and bird and bat boxes have been attached to the proposed building. This is an acceptable enhancement and complies with policy GP5. The development, to conclude, the reason for refusal, as per the officer's report, is the development, by reasons of large scale, unsympathetic design and location, will have a significant adverse impact upon interests of acknowledged importance, namely the character and appearance of the host dwelling and the surrounding area, contrary to policies GP2 and GP6 of the Newport Local Development Plan. Thank you, and I'd like to welcome any questions.
We do have a speaker on this, Ash Johnson. You have 10 minutes. Oh, 5 minutes, sorry.
Thank you. Good morning. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. This application is deeply personal to our family. We are seeking permission to build a small annex to house my mum, who is 75 years old and suffers from both Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. As her condition worsens, she requires increasing care and support that cannot safely be provided while she currently lives independently in West Wales. I am an only child and I have no family support beyond my husband and grown children. The annex will allow my mum to remain close to her family following my dad's passing in October, while we provide round-the-clock care with a safe, adapted environment. The annex has been very carefully considered and designed to meet her specific medical needs, including wheelchair accessibility, wider circulation spaces, and appropriate facilities for her care and dignity. In fact, the size of the annex, just 42 square metres, and is smaller than the Council's own minimum space standard for a one-bedroom flat, as set out in their own design guidance. This is by no way excessive. It is entirely proportionate for her care needs. Throughout this process, we are fully engaged with the Planning Authority. We followed the proper pre-application process, met with the officers on site, and responded constructively to their concerns. As a result, we made substantial amendments to the original proposal, reducing the size by over 58% compared to the original plan. The chosen location for the annex was carefully selected to ensure it remains completely screened from public view along the highway by our existing home. The design fully respects the character of the original barn conversion, with matching roof lines, ridge heights, eave levels, materials and external finishes. The annex sits against a blank side elevation of the existing property and therefore causes no harm to the architectural integrity of the building. Further to this, we have incorporated the hawthorn hedge as recommended by the planning officer at the site visit. This is to provide visual screening to the development from the public rights of way and also biodiversity enhancement measures. It is therefore very disappointing that the officer's report in 7.2.4 uses language suggesting that the functional connection appears a little contrived. We believe that this is an unfair and inappropriate suggestion, implying dishonesty where none exists. We have been entirely transparent and consistent throughout. We understand the physical and functional link is a key element and requirement to make the annex application compliant with the council policy, which we have endeavoured to incorporate since our initial submission. Without this link, it would fail on policy grounds and not allow us the ability to care for her 24 hours a day through all seasons of the year. The annex is for my mum's essential care and she will remain fully dependent on the main dwelling for care, support, family interaction and daily living. We would also ask the committee to also please consider the wider context here. This site was originally a working farm, with large agricultural barns occupying much of the garden area until relatively recently. The suggestion that this is an untouched area of open countryside is very misleading. Furthermore, the wider setting includes the Lamworn Steelworks, the Mega Brewery, the mainline railway, wind turbines, power pylons, and significantly existing infrastructure, all which are visible from our property. In fact, there is an ongoing live planning application for a large-scale solar farm in the adjacent fields, which will have a far greater visual impact on this landscape than our modest annex. We are therefore left rather bemused as to why officers have adopted a neutral stance on that major development while taking such a robust position against this small, compassionate family care proposal. This feels like a two-tier and inconsistent approach to planning. The annex has no objections from any technical consultees, including highways, drainage, ecology, natural resources or archaeology. There have been no neighbour objections, and importantly, Councillor Mogford, who knows the site well, has given his full support to the application, describing it as presenting little or no adverse visual effect. Finally, I would respectfully remind the committee that the Welsh Government actively promotes the creation of lifetime homes, adaptable housing solutions that allow vulnerable people to remain in their communities for as long as possible. The annex directly aligns with that principle, as well as the objectives of well-being of future generations. Well-being of the Future Generations Act. Chair members, this is not a speculative application. It is a carefully considered, policy-compliant, compassionate solution that will allow us to care for my mum with dignity and love. We sincerely hope the committee will recognise the urgent need and strong justification for the annex and approve our application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Open up a discussion.
Thank you. So, with the annex, what is there any way of, if we were minded to grant it, putting in a condition that it can never be sold separately and it must be used by members of the household?
Thank you. Yeah, so this is something that we've discussed previously. In relation to a planning condition, we could control that the annex would be used, in conjunction with the main dwelling house, as an ancillary feature. In terms of a sale, that's not something that we'll be able to enforce under the planning regime, but we could control that the annex is an annex and remains as an annex to the main dwelling house.
It should be clear, though, that that doesn't prevent any future applications coming in. Even if we put a condition on, we've restricted at this juncture, if members were minded to approve, but there could be future applications pressures to create a new dwelling there, and we'd have to consider those on their merits at that juncture.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With the size of the extension now, slightly dimensional is larger in capacity. Would it help your assessment of rejecting it if it's a smaller scale building, with the size downwards?
So, obviously, we have to assess the application that's before us today. We have, as the applicants mentioned, and I mentioned in my report, we've undertaken pre-application process on this, and we did raise concerns with the scale and the size of the annex. That was scaled down during pre-application discussions at that point, but the scheme that's obviously come forward now is still at the scale that we had concerns with at pre-application. So there were options discussed at that point, but there have been no real further changes to try and address that from our point of view.
No, that's nice and clear. It is like you said, you've opened the gate. There's been discussions on sizeability, so okay, all options covered.
Councillor Watkins.
Chair, could officers please put the floor plan up, please, of the property and the adjoining property? Right, that particular one, now, which is the new annex which they're talking about developing? Is that little one on the side, is it?
Sorry. Yes. This, where you can see my cursor is over here, this is the proposed annex building with the link extension here to the existing linear barn complex.
Okay. And that now has been included in the Bishton plan as such?
So if
It was outside,
yeah.
But now it's been including in.
Yeah, so if I go back to this, which hopefully will help, this black line here is the Bishton village boundary, which was added in the Newport local development plan. So the site is, the eastern boundary of the site is the rural urban boundary.
But that boundary that development was not included in the beginning until the development plan.
When you say that development, are you referring to the previous barn conversion?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the barn conversion took place when the Newport Unitary Development Plan was adopted. I think that changed circa 2011-12. So the application that was in previously was assessed as a conversion within the countryside under the Unitary Development Plan. This application now is within the Bishton village boundary as per the Newport local development plan.
Councillor Horton. Gavin, can you put your microphone on?
The property is being built in line with the existing building, so there won't be any real difference to the view that anybody that happens to be walking along the public right-of-way is really going to see. Plus, I've just been looking on Google Maps and dropped the pin in there. Plus, you can clearly see the Zodiac plant in the background. You can see all of the pylons. You can see all of the turbines. So I can't see where the alignment is with how this is going to make such a dramatic impact into the visuals of the area, unless there's other things which we're not being shown or being told about. It doesn't really, for myself, knowing the area, like I say, very well, doesn't really align with the recommendation for refusal. Unless you want to expand on that.
No, I mean, we've set out our design assessment in the response, so I don't think there was a question there. It's obviously just voicing your opinion.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
I guess the question is what is, in your opinion, what is the real problem with with the visuals, the view, the obstruction to view?
Yeah, so the barn, as I mentioned, the barn conversion is of a very sort of traditional layout and form. It's very linear. It's a high quality barn conversion. We've got the eastern elevation, whereby the proposal would project from, which is a very simple form. It's the garden, sort of as you stand there, it feels rural. It's very open, undeveloped. And this would ultimately result in a very large-scale extension, that you would lose that sort of simple linear form of the barn conversion, that sort of high architectural quality of that clean elevation, and it would result in a large projection from that, which would be visible, and you'd lose the appearance of the existing eastern elevation.
Can I just challenge on what you just said then? So you said you used the word major development, yet in point 4 of the recommendations for refusal, the opening statement is due to the minor nature of the proposed development. So page 10 or page 25.
Don't recall using the word major. Okay. I don't know if that was perhaps very clear.
We've got here, the development by reasons of large-scale and unsympathetic design and location, which is what's written in the document. Then at the bottom here, due to the minor nature of the proposed development, they're both contradicting each other. So it's either one or the other?
Yes, I think that's within the context of the application. In terms of it being a minor development, it is, in terms of classification of planning application, it's a minor development under the procedural order.
Yeah, so we're talking about different things here. The note to the applicant talks about it being a minor development in EIA terms. That's environmental impact assessment terms. So this is where we as a council have to make a decision on whether something is EIA development or not, and that comes down to the scale. So, for example, a housing development of 100 houses would be a major development, but it might be minor in scale for EIA terms. So that's nothing to do with the scale of the proposal relative to this application itself.
Councillor Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Excuse me. A similar point to Councillor Horton, really, but I'm not sure it was answered. Certainly, not that I could pick up. I just wanted the planning officer to comment on the unsympathetic design point in the refusal reason. So the applicant made a statement that the materials used are of the same construction type in terms of stonework and roofing materials as the original barn conversion. So I just wanted a point about what the unsympathetic design is of the extension.
Yeah, so in terms of the term unsympathetic, I think I was talking about the layout of the barn, the existing barn conversion, and this being unsympathetic to that. Ultimately, design is a judgment call. We have made an assessment of that, as set out in the report and the presentation today. If committee take a different view on that, then that is their judgment to do so.
Thanks.
And sorry, the other aspect of that was the sort of the windows and doors that have been included within the proposed building, and more of a contemporary sort of design and appearance, as opposed to the more traditional openings which were retained through the barn conversion. Just add to that.
Councillor Rheoli.
Thank you, Chair. Just for transparency, this falls within my ward, and I've met every criteria to appear here today as a member of the Planning Committee. The application before you today is smaller. To put it into perspective, it's smaller than a one-bedroom flat. So that's the perspective of what we're dealing with here. The recommendation for refusal centres on the annex's perceived, prominent, unsympathetic and bulky design, contrary to policies GB2 and GP6. However, I believe this assessment overlooks critical details and merits a more nuanced interpretation. We really need to look into this interpretation of these policies. Firstly, the annex serves a vital purpose to provide essential, accessible accommodation for an elderly family member requiring care. This isn't just an arbitrary extension, committee. It's a home designed with specific pressing needs in mind, fulfilling policy H7's criteria for supplementary living and dwellings. Secondly, the design itself demonstrates a clear commitment to sympathy with the existing barn conversion. Proposed materials, matching stone and roof tiles, are as a direct effort to integrate the new structure seamlessly. Whilst the report criticises contemporary windows, these choices directly support the accessibility requirements of the user. Now, this is a critical consideration that needs to be applied here, smaller than a one-bedroom flat. Secondly, finally, almost, Chair, the concerns regarding the impact from the public right-of-way are addressed by proposed landscaping. The infrastructure statement includes new native hedge planting, specifically to intend to screen the annex. The proactive mitigation has been overwhelmingly acknowledged by the landscaping department as having no objections in principle. This also should be given significant weight. This application before us, we have to balance between the needs of society and the needs of the Welsh Government to try and have sustainable living. This application is a well-considered proposal that balances essential family needs with a design that strives for integration. It utilises appropriate materials and practical solutions to mitigate any at all visual concerns. I look beyond the subjective interpretation and I would be willing to approve and move this application. I recognise its functionality, its necessity, and I recognise the efforts made to ensure the appropriate integration within the rural-urban fringe. I am willing, as I said, to move the approval of this application. It is no way intrusive. It is smaller than a one-bedroom flat. It is an annex, an extension to an existing family dwelling based upon the need to require care for their elderly relative. And so I would move approval based upon, I believe that it does cater for policies GP2 and GP6. I believe that the interpretation of that hasn't taken into account the crucial details that I have outlined. And also, it fully embraces H7's criteria for supporting complementary and supplementary dwellings. So I move that we approve this. Every case is individual, it sets no precedents, and therefore I move approval of this application.
Would I be able to offer some clarification on, could I? Yeah, I'd just like to clarify a point that Councillor Rheoli has raised and the applicant also raised in his statement in regards to the comparison to a one-bedroom flat, or being slightly less than a one-bedroom flat. The annex itself is, yes. The annex itself, we've unilaterally agreed that it has complied with policy H7. That's not really for debate. But obviously what we're looking at is the scale of the overall development. We've also got additional storage and home office space that do not form part of that assessment of that annex, the size. When you combine those together, we're looking at circa sort of 70 square metres, which is roughly a 43% increase to the overall the original property. So I just wanted to provide a point of clarification on that. In terms of the landscaping, yeah, the landscape officer hasn't objected by looking at the proposed location of landscaping. We haven't raised an issue with that. If committee are minded to approve that, then we would be looking to put a condition on to secure final details of landscaping. But I'd just like to clarify that isn't going to screen what is a large annex. It will offer an improvement to the boundary. It will offer some biodiversity enhancement, but it won't screen the annex building or the overall building. So just to provide a point of clarity on that.
No other comments. The recommendation is for it to be refused. Do I have a proposer?
I've made a motion to accept this, so I think you need to put that, Chair, to the committee approval.
Councillor Rheoli wasn't taken. There was no seconder. Take this motion first, and then we're...
It's not too late, is it, to ask committee again if they wish to second? Anybody wish to second the amendment?
Councillor, can I ask that, from a procedural perspective, we follow through. The officer's recommendation is refusal. Members might not be minded to approve, second that, and then if that motion isn't passed, you can put a motion forward and we'll have a vote on that if there's a seconder. So we'll vote on the officer's recommendation firstly. And then, as I said, if it's not seconded or the motion doesn't carry, we'll come back to committee for consideration at the next stage. Thank you.
So can we take a vote on the first option? The recommendation is for refusal. Do we have a proposer and a seconder? That motion has failed. So, is there anyone else want to propose something? Councillor Rheoli?
Thank you, Chair. I propose approval of this application. I believe that on the grounds, planning grounds, that GP, just exact, I'm going to bring my notes up, GP2, GP2 and GP6, I believe my interpretation of that, and has merited that it can, in our opinion, meet those criteria when you balance up and take it into account, and it actually fulfills policy H7's criteria of a supplementary dwelling. So I shall move that.
Do we have a seconder?
Okay, just before members vote on this, and I don't have a problem with the vote at all, just to be clear, the feeling, or the view appears to be that members consider the proposal to be acceptable visually. One will not have a detrimental impact given its scale and design. I just want to be clear on that in the first instance. From a procedural perspective, you'll need to consider whether the motion, the resolution, is to grant officers delegated powers to attach conditions to any permission granted, or whether you wanted to come back to committee next month with a different resolution and suggested conditions for members to consider those conditions. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Howells is...
Councillor Howells.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was going to ask whether we could amend the motion with Councillor Rheoli's permission to include a number of planning conditions on that motion. So I would support approval of the application, but I'd like to see a planning condition on there that the annex approved shall not be occupied at any time other than for the purposes ancillary to the residential use of the main dwelling house, and shall not be used as a separate unit of accommodation, nor shall it be let, sold or otherwise disposed of independently of the main dwelling. And the reason for that would be to ensure the annex remains ancillary to the main dwelling and to prevent the creation of a separate residential unit in the interests of proper planning and to safeguard the amenities of the area. And secondly, I take the planning officer's request for a planning condition around future planting and green areas. Apologies for not having the correct term on that.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we'd need to consider a few conditions. As I said, I think the occupancy one is one we could look at. We can't consider being sold, sublet, etc. We would put a standard condition on in terms of being used as ancillary accommodation to the main dwelling. That's the way we'd look at. But I think there's a few conditions we need to go away and consider what we think would need to be attached relative to this application. But we could include that one if members are minded to do so.
I'm happy to include the add-on.
You second Councillor Howells' recommendations. Councillor Watkins.
Chair, I'm minded to approve, but under the suggestion of Councillor Rheoli and Councillor Howells and the officers, I'm quite happy to officers to go away and look at conditions and bring it back to Planning Committee next month.
Is that seconded? Because that's a new motion. Just to clarify, the approval is to come back to committee with suggested conditions.
I'm happy to second that proposal, Chair.
Now, can we take a vote, please? All those for? On the motion. On the approval is coming back to committee next month with conditions. All those for? And those against? Any abstentions? Just for the record, I was for. The decision hasn't been made today, and it'll come back with committee next month with a decision. Okay? The second application is 25-0052. It's the Lamworm Ward. Westland Horticultural Limited. Garant Roberts is presenting.
Right, thank you, Chair. This is an application that is before you because it's a major application, so it would have come to you in the normal run of things. Development description then is retention of engineering works and use of land as an open storage and distribution facility with ancillary staff, welfare, security, office space, along with the laying of roads, marshalling areas, the erection of new fencing and lighting, and associated ground, drainage, engineering and landscape works. Okay. Right, so this is the site which is basically off the EDR, and these units here, if you can, I can never quite get used to the lag on this. This is Air Products, where the cursor is, and Newport Galvanizers here, and this is land to the immediate south of it, so behind it, and the site constitutes a former tip for the Llanwen Steelworks. So during the steelmaking process, the black... Right. Around to give me a hand. Full screen. Where are we now? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm sure at some point we'll get there. Councillor, happy? Yeah, excellent. Thank you for your help, Grant. Okay, this... yeah, it's just lack of familiarity. I very rarely use these slides. Right, yes, so it is on land south of the Eastern Distributor Road, and it's this area here which appears grey on the slide. So you can see the existing Newport Galvanizers there and Air Products here. So it's the land immediately behind it, and as noted, this was originally used as a tip for blast furnace slag in association with the Llanwen Steelworks, which is to the north, and you can see the retained works in that slide on the screen currently. Okay, so land in use for an industrial process. That industrial process came to an end some time ago, as you'll all realise, and currently that slag deposit is being reworked by Tata, in part to facilitate this development and just generally anyway because they're selling it as secondary aggregate. Right, this slide gives you a slightly closer aerial image. It gives you an idea of what the site is like. You can see that there was some, it was partly revegetated historically. We'll see a more recent photograph where you can see most of that has been removed, and it gives you some idea of the contours on the site. The site is slightly raised because it's been tipped, and it's at a higher level than the surrounding natural levels. Okay, this has come from the applicant's information pack that they submitted with the application. That gives you an idea of what the site is currently like, and it gives you an idea of a reworking of that aggregate pile to, I'd say, to produce secondary aggregates and then sell them off site. Okay, so fairly recent in that view. And just to reinforce that, this is a photograph from a site visit. This shows you what we're looking at, effectively a level blank canvas. Okay, in terms of the development itself then, the layout drawing is here, and although it's a bit difficult to see, there's quite a lot of detail on it. In effect, the entry road is here, and that's pre-existing, and it goes out onto an existing all-movement light-controlled junction on the Eastern Distributor Road. The proposal is to put offices immediately adjacent to that access point, to lay out concrete roads around the site, and then to have a series of external storage areas which will basically consist of a compressed aggregate. The site will also need drainage works, so that will consist of some open ditches and some culverted areas, and then it will drain into the existing Tartar drainage system, which is completely separate from the rest of the levels. Okay. Now, this gives you an idea of that private drainage system, and the reason why we're spending a bit of time on that is because NRW had some concerns with the proposal. Clearly, it is a contaminated site. It's been tipped. And there were concerns that water flows from this site might enter the Gwent levels and the triple SIs, which have high ecological value. But the Tartar system is completely separate from the natural pre-existing drainage system. So when the works was built back in the 1960s, they put in a completely separate drainage mechanism. So what happens is that the surface water from the Tartar site basically drains into a sequence of private reens, which are shown colorized on this image. They then flow in a southerly direction down to the pumping station here, and then they are pumped out through that pipeline, which is marked green, and that enters the Severn, basically at Porton. So any waters that drain off this site will continue to use that private system. They will not enter the Gwent levels, the wider Gwent levels, and they will remain separate. Okay, so we don't have any concerns about the contamination of surface waters because the existing arrangement will continue. Right, this is a further colorized version of that, just showing you slightly more details, slightly closer in. But what you'll realize from those colors is that the site is contained within this private drainage system. So it doesn't really matter which way the water runs, north, south, east, west. It enters interceptor drains, and then those drains will go into a much larger drain along the southern edge of the EDR, which is this sort of bluish color here that you can see, and then drain southwards down to the pumping station as previously explained. Okay, in terms of what it will look like then, this is the office accommodation and the welfare facility. It is very utilitarian, basically stacked containers. Just a little further information, the security kiosk is top left, the security gate top right, fencing details bottom left, and the main entrance gates bottom right. Okay, so it's very utilitarian, but you also do need to consider the context of the site, which you've seen in the photographs. Okay. This is the road in, private road, not adopted. This is basically the view from the EDR looking south towards where the site will be, and you can see Newport galvanizers to the right and Air Products to the left. And you can see the overhead gantry carrying in one of the Air Products pipelines. Okay, in terms of that all-known junction, any of you who have driven down there will be familiar with it. It looks like this. It's readily identifiable by the overhead gantry carrying the pipeline. But as you can see, light controlled, allows movements in all directions, because clearly this is a project that will generate significant HGV traffic. Okay, in terms of the main issues that are identified in the report, we talk about principle of use. Well, as noted, it is industrial land. It's being put forward for an industrial purpose, so the principle is entirely acceptable. Surface water drainage we've mentioned, and we've explained why that is acceptable. Foul drainage was a point of some concern. There will be a small number of workers on the site, as you will have realised from the office accommodation. The foul drainage will be to a package treatment plant, which will then discharge into those surface water drains. And we're entirely satisfied that that can be adequately dealt with because the effluent from the package treatment plant has been treated, and then there is a long dwell time within those reens before it reaches the pumping station. So we're quite confident that the existing drainage body can accommodate the effluent coming from the package treatment plant. For clarity, when I say effluent, it is treated. It's the same kind of thing that would come out of a Dŵr Cymru water treatment works. Okay, but it's a private facility which will be owned and run by the applicant and on this site. Okay, so we consider foul drainage to be acceptable. In terms of planting and diversity enhancement, Grant mentioned the national requirement for that in the earlier application, so I won't labour that point. But if we go back to the proposed layout plan briefly, you will see there is a very limited amount of greenery proposed on this site. Effectively, they were looking at vegetating some of the open drainage channels that were proposed, and that is the green shading that you can see on the drawing. And on the eastern end of the development, they were proposing an earth bund, which they would allow to naturally revegetate. Our view was that that was insufficient green infrastructure for a site of this scale, but we proposed addressing that through a condition that would require an additional planting scheme. Okay, so we consider that subject to a condition requiring more planting, the biodiversity element can be fulfilled. In terms of ground contamination, they are merely retaining what is already there. Blast furnace slag, which will be rolled, compressed, and used as a wearing surface for their development. So there is no significant change, and as noted, the water environment is already protected through the existing drainage arrangements. Okay, minor issues we identified: appearance and design. You've seen it; it's very utilitarian, but you've also seen the site and you've seen the industrial complexes next to it. It's entirely in keeping with the nature of the area, and it's not considered to be problematical. To the south is the Gwent Levels, as you will have realised, the special landscape area, but we consider that it's sufficiently disconnected from that special landscape area that this proposal will have no impact, no harmful impact upon the special landscape area, so we're satisfied with that as well. Traffic generation and HGV, well, clearly, yes, significant amounts of traffic will be generated, including heavy goods vehicles, but the local road network is entirely suitable to accommodate those vehicles, and the junction, as noted, is entirely suitable to allow safe entry onto the EDR, so we're unconcerned by that point. Lighting is proposed. It's limited. It's primarily around the office areas, and the applicant has proposed that it only operates when it's required and will not operate outside of that, and we can apply a planning condition to consolidate and confirm that that does indeed happen. It is within a floodplain, but the site is raised. As you will have realised, it's been tipped, and therefore the consequences of flooding have shown to be entirely acceptable. And the final minor point that we consider is archaeology, but again, you will have realised the retention of the tipped materials means that this will have no impact on historic ground below, and therefore no impact on the archaeological resource. So, in conclusion, we're satisfied that the proposal is acceptable. We recommend that it is granted subject to conditions. Just for your clarity, a condition that's required was omitted from the officer report, and we intend to apply a condition that saying the storage shall not be higher than 5 metres. The applicants confirmed they won't be storing anything more than 2 metres. We can give them a certain amount of headroom without any harm to the interests at the site. So we consider a condition saying 5 metres maximum height of the stored materials is suitable on this occasion. So that's just for your information, because it wasn't in the report initially. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the surveys that you carried out and looking at it, what about wildlife surveys? Any feedback on that? Because we are quite close to the Gwent Levels, but anything about dormice, anything at all?
I'll just nip back to this slide. They did do a preliminary ecological appraisal, and they identified that there was some open mosaic habitat on the site. And this slide probably gives you the best indication of that, because if you look on the edges along where the red line was, there was a certain amount of vegetation which had developed on the tip. And for example, if you look at the south end of that slide, the bottom end of it, that gives you an indication of the type of thing that might develop if it's given sufficient time undisturbed. But the bottom line is what was there in the slide you're looking at, and what was there on this slide where they'd clearly removed quite a lot of that vegetation. There was very little green infrastructure present. They were offering us very little. They considered that to be adequate compensation for what was being lost, and also sufficient to secure the net benefit that Grant mentioned. We disagreed, hence we've asked for this additional condition. But we acknowledge that the baseline for this site in ecological terms is not very good. In terms of protected species, nothing.
Yes, thank you for that. I just wanted to check, because obviously where there's water, some vegetation on the outline, there could be some growth and animals there, but I'm satisfied, thank you.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Chair. south of that slag tip, which they're planning to develop, is there a attenuation pond? I was under the impression there was.
Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to see. I don't tout myself as any expert on Tartar's private drainage system, but I do have some familiarity with it because of the number of applications which have gone on in the area on Glanllyn, which you can just see in the north west of the slide, this area here where the cursor is currently. The channels themselves provided significant attenuation, and it's also a pumped system, which basically means any surplus water, they just pump it away. There is some attenuation built into the system, but primarily it relied on the pumping mechanism, as far as I understand it, to control water levels. Because it wasn't completely isolated, there was some inflow from the north, from the agricultural land, around Bishton, the sites we've just been looking at now. But there is limited attenuation, but there is some. So, for example, there were settlement lagoons basically here where the cursor is now, and you can see this one still contains open water, and again, another here. So there is a degree of attenuation built into the system, but I can't give you full details and figures on that.
Right. The other thing was, I was going to mention about traffic light system. I wasn't sure whether it was a traffic light system coming from that development, but it is.
It is, yeah. It's fully light controlled because obviously Air Products and Newport galvanizers are already there. So yeah, it's all movement light controlled.
Okay. Going on to item 7.19. And it says so far down, unforeseen contamination conditions should be applied and that the infiltration of rainwater should be minimized. However, the latter of problematic since much of the site will be left unsealed and it is not clear if the retained slag layer on the site can be sufficiently compacted to prevent infiltration since its formation is unclear. Whether it has been excavated, cleared or contaminated, unfortunately, or uniformly crushed and reformed and compacted. So I am concerned that they've moved some of the slag, but it's unclear of what is left and whether contamination of the streams could be done. The other thing is, in regards to that, it runs into the Severn. And NRW has said that at the moment Tata has a license, but they will have to renew that license if this contamination continues. And who is going to monitor the treatment of this contamination that goes into the Severn? I understand that it's owned by Tata, but at the end of the day it goes into the River Severn, and that's where I'm concerned about.
Yeah, the existing scenario is that this material has been tipped, and it's been tipped since the 80s, and it carried on being tipped up until the end of steel manufacturing. It's there. It is subject to environmental permitting by NRW, okay, so not the council, nothing to do with us, separate body. Tata will have their own environmental compliance unit. They will be monitoring it, and they need to monitor it to ensure that they are within the terms of their environmental permit. But ultimately, the environmental permit falls to NRW. It's outside our control, and we wouldn't look to replicate what another authority is doing. We know that this has been turned over and reformed. I say helpfully, they gave us this image, which pretty much shows them doing it. Okay, so they have engineered this area. But it's worth considering that on Glanllyn, the same engineering process took place. They turned over the made ground and removed gross contamination and then effectively put it back. And heavily compacted it to well over 90%. There was very little air void in it and very little infiltration through it as a result. Now, this process, there have been question marks about how effectively it's been done, but we approached it from the perspective of the tip is already there. It's already there. It was granular, it was loose, it was unconsolidated, water freely infiltrated into it, because some of the submission documents confirmed that, and then it was intercepted and taken off by the tartar drains. So if you look sort of to the right-hand side of that image, one of those reams is showing up turquoise, really. I'm not sure if it really is that colour or whether they document, but they've altered the colours in this image. But nevertheless, there is an existing situation on this tipped site. This material is already there, is what we're saying. We know that it's been engineered, we know that it's been compacted, but if there is infiltration in the future under this development, then there was anyway. You have a current situation, it freely infiltrates. So we took the view that whatever they do, it can't be worse than the current situation, which is currently controlled by NRW anyway. So we don't think anything that happens under this development can make it worse than the current position. And if it did, the control lies with NRW anyway. So there is an existing permitting regime. We won't seek to replicate it. Planning guidance tells us we shouldn't. So we were content that other than an unforeseen contamination condition, i.e. unless they find something really nasty in there that's not expected, then this is an acceptable scheme because it is no worse than the current position.
So are you saying that NRW will be monitoring it, or is Tata Steel going to be monitoring it?
Tata do monitor it because they need to meet the terms of their discharge license, but there is the external control of NRW. Now, I can't tell you what their monitoring regime is, but they control the permit.
Councillor Horton.
I was just going to put some clarification around Trevor's question. As nobody in this room knows, I started my career in the steel industry as a chemist, and I used to sample those reed beds, so I know exactly what's in there, and I know exactly what it deals with. And they were designed to deal with the coke ovens, so there's nothing that's going to go into those beds that is anywhere near as bad as what used to go into there. So, for me, with a chemist hat on, I think personally, I think it's pretty robust and is quite safe. And yeah, the water is that colour.
Yeah, it's usually very alkaline, which controls what grows in it, so it can be astonishingly clear sometimes. It's because it's biologically dead.
I used to work in a nuke plant, the neutralising plant. Councillor Rheoli.
I can't follow that, Chairman, all those statements, but my question is being asked by someone who is not biologically dead, so thank you for that.
The recommendation is if I can find it. Granted with conditions. Do we have a proposer? A seconder? All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Thank you.